And to me, this is one of the reasons why I don't know that this actually does set a lot of precedent going forward. I mean, yes, it is going to encourage more of this from, gun control groups who can, work with these victims' families. But at the same time, like you and I have talked, I think the considerations of a functional working gun company are very different than the considerations of the insurers of what remains of the remnants of Remington Outdoor Company. So I think you will see, because I think ultimately that's what I sense from you, Steve, is like, I don't understand how you could look at the weakness of this evidence and say, okay, let's go ahead and settle. And I don't know that we're ever going to understand that unless we talk to these insurers, directly, who aren't talking exactly. But the National Shooting Sports Foundation in its statement kind of highlighted, look, this wasn't a firearms company that settled this. And I think the expectation is an actual working gun company would fight this, because they would say, no, this is, look at the evidence here. You're going to try to tell me that because I, put an ad in a gun magazine that somebody may or may not have even seen, that was the cause of them criminally using this product, and that it's somehow my fault and not theirs. I think, again, we're going to see these fights continue to play out. And none of these cases, here's the other interesting thing. None of these cases have ever gone to trial. They've either been tossed out by a judge, or they've been, settled before they go to trial in this case. But most of the time, the vast majority of the time, these cases don't go to trial because a judge says there's no case here. And I think that's going to continue to be the outcome of the vast majority of these cases that are filed. But again, the death by a thousand cut strategy, let's just, keep suing, and see what happens. Like I said, that's going to continue. And ultimately, it's going to be up to the Supreme Court to step in and say, look, here's what the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act actually means. Yes, it's constitutionally valid. And here's where you cannot sue, and here's where you can. Because right now, I think the law is absolutely being abused.
Yeah, and to be fair to the Supreme Court, first of all, I think those are all really good points, and good reason to think that perhaps this settlement isn't going to be as impactful as you might think on the surface, right? Especially the way it was first reported by a lot of places, with the point you made earlier about this doesn't really set a legal precedent in any way, and they're not necessarily admitting liability by settling in this manner. But to the point of the Supreme Court too, I would mention that even though I think their decision not to intervene here at that point in the case ultimately probably was a major cause of how this went down, there is good reason for why they might not intervene, because there was no actual, there had been no arguments on the merits. You had a novel claim going on here that didn't really have any actual case law built around it. There wasn't much in the form of a case for them to actually examine, other than just outright saying there's, the PLCAA completely cuts off any sort of deliberation over this at all. So they perhaps wanted more of a record to review. And maybe if it had gone to the merits and Remington or the insurers had ended up losing, perhaps the court would have taken it again. Plus, the court is different than it was in 2019 when it decided not to intervene in this case. So there are reasons to think that while Congress is extremely unlikely to do anything on the PLCAA, especially with President Joe Biden in office, who literally, that is his number one priority, is repealing, at least when he talks publicly, that's his least favorite gun law at the federal level. But he's not going to sign some sort of fix to it, I would imagine. But the Supreme Court might intervene, or is much more likely to. And so perhaps it's not the end of the world,
And it's not the end of the world. And you do make a really good point about it really might have been too early for the court to intervene at that point. But I'm really keeping my eyes on this government of Mexico case in Boston. And if the federal judge allows that case to actually proceed, I am going to be really curious to see what, if anything, the Supreme Court has to say about it. Because now again, we've got some other issues that are implicated here. Can a foreign government sue U.S. gun makers, for supposedly violating trade practices here in the United States. This does give the court, I think, another chance to intervene and weigh in. And again, maybe the record is going to be a little early, but I don't think so at this point, because I think at that point the question then becomes, look, is this even allowed under the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, or should this claim even go forward? So I think the court is going to, if that case is not tossed out by the U.S. District Judge, the Supreme Court will have another chance to take a bite at this. And, I hope that they do, because again, in the meantime, this is just going to continue to be another strategy deployed by, blue state politicians. And it's not always going to be, victims' family members. I mean, again, the New York law that allows people to sue under the public nuisance statute not only empowers private citizens to do so, but the Attorney General. And Letitia James, Steve, seems to have an interest in, the Second Amendment and organizations and entities and maybe even manufacturers of firearms as well. So, it would not shock me to see Letitia James announce that she was pursuing litigation against a gun maker or Rob Bonta out in California, right?
Certainly not. But hey, Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, she's just looking out for the NRA members, as you well know. Yes. That's her only interest, is whether or not the NRA is well run, and not what it's doing in terms of its advocacy. I'm sure we all believe that, certainly.